have an authoritarian society, and to have a society that one joined of one's own free will in order to make a kind of world other than the ancient world. I think it's most fitting that it was an American who first asserted literature has to be modern. Now, what he specifically meant by that is a whole other lecture. Poetry has to be brief, etc., not mythological, etc., and so on. In the same way that Baudelaire's great essay on Constantin Guy, which he calls the painter of modern life, is a tremendous emphasis. Get rid of gods and popes and authoritarian pictures and paint what you see around you.
Early on, you became an advocate and a theorist, a spokesman, and historian. Do you tend to be a little uneasy with an artist who is so articulate? Has that been a help or a hindrance for you?
So much a hindrance that for a long time I quit writing. You see, a close friend of mine who died prematurely of leukemia, a great American historian of my generation called Richard Hofstadter, and one of his masterpieces is called something like The History of Anti-Intellectualism in America. The Anglo-Saxon tradition, and even the French tradition, is that painters are smart craftsmen, and that there's something arrogant about a painter being literate. Though I've, in my life, never met a first-rate painter who wasn't highly intelligent and extremely articulate in his own terms. It doesn't mean that he writes a Coleridge essay or so on, but is perfectly able to communicate. And actually, painters are the most gregarious of all the artists. Most of the sculptors I know hate each other. Most of the architects. Or I remember one night being in a poet's house, and there were 4 Pulitzer Prize poets there, and I was the only painter. And I was talking to the women after dinner, and the 4 poets were in a passionate discussion, vehement, at the other end of the room. And finally, I rudely, male pig chauvinist, got up and said, "This sounds so interesting, I've got to listen to it," and went over. And what they would Robert Lowell was one of them. And they had all accepted that Robert Lowell was number 1 of all American poets, but they were all arguing who was number 2. And really it blows. Now, painters have their own rivalries and jealousies and so on, but actually painters are voyeurs and cafe and coffee house people, and have much more a live and let live attitude. And I think basically you're not trying to convert people that one line is it, or whatever. Or maybe I'm naive. My wife looks at me, my European wife looks at me sometimes and says, "You know why I love you so much?" And I say, "Why?" And she says, "Because you're so innocent."
There are the spirit of several painters who haunt your canvases. And I'm thinking of Picasso and Matisse and Rothko and perhaps even Miro. Would that be accurate? To the work of what artists do you most respond?
More than anybody, Piero della Francesca. Secondly, Goya. But and many others. But you see, there's something else that one has to explain. For example, I regard the Van Eycks as, or the one, no, so far as I know, nobody knows whether they're 1 or 2, as miraculous painters. And I can only stand there in dumb admiration. But it's impossible for a painter of my cast of mind to do anything with the kind of thing they do, or with Vermeer, or with Velázquez. I've always thought, with absolutely no factual foundation, but I have taught a lot and have known most of the great artists of the century, or at least half of them, that there may be, say, 6 basic kinds of painting minds. And at any given historical moment, the scene needs one kind more than another, and therefore it becomes very prominent. And in that sense, though there are many artists I adore, I have to say that then I belong to, I suppose, to the degree that I can tell, a family of black painters, which would and earth-colored painters, which would include Manet and Goya and Matisse, because Matisse is such a great colorist. Nobody understands that his greatest color is black. And other such artists, there's certain works of Picasso that work that way too, and Miro. Certainly, most people, for example, Reinhardt, everybody talks about as a black painter. I don't think he's a black painter at all. I think he's a painter who uses dark tones, which is something very different from thinking of black as black in the sense that one thinks of fire engine red as red, if I make myself clear. And it also has to do with a sense of the surface and so on.
A very carefully articulated attitude toward color, and I assume a strong aversion to some colors too.
Yeah, I can't bear synthetic colors. You know, I like the earth colors and ultramarine blue and the cadmium reds and yellows, and but aniline dye colors, or now psychedelic colors, so on, I find as offensive as, I mean, I think they're pretty okay for their own sake, but what do you say, I can imagine somebody drinking Fresca or Coca-Cola very easily, but for somebody to presume that this is an equivalent or a substitute for a Latache or a Latour, would you say, for real wine, in the same way that somebody supposes a Kraft slice of cheese and cellophane is what's really meant by cheese. And it's perfectly okay if you're in a hurry and want to stuff something in your pocket or whatever.
One years of your legendary interest in matters gastronomical, including the fact that you moved close to the best restaurant in your part of the countryside. I wonder...
Well, that's an exaggeration. It is true, I found my place going to the restaurant, but I didn't move there on account of the restaurant. That would be absurd. It'd be cheaper to hire a chef.
However, I wonder if you could tell us what prompted you to accept a commission by, speaking of matters, drinking matters, by Baron Philippe de Rothschild, who several years ago commissioned you to execute a painting above a Mouton Rothschild wine label. What prompted you to do that, and what is the image that you created?
Well, again, there are a lot of elements involved. In the first place, it wasn't exactly a commission. He called me one day, in an effect as one gentleman to another, implied, I'm very good at what I do, and you're very good at what you do. Would you like to exchange? And temperamentally, I would much rather exchange than sell. Actually, the worst year in years. He misled me that way. It also happened, at that moment, I had just finished, there's an aspect of my work that's not very well known. because I've really never pulled it all together for an exhibition. A lot of them that I did in the 50s are in England. And I have some huge ones in my studio. One was shown, I think, in my last show or the one before. But they're sort of primordial creatures in a way, or they're very strongly atavistic. One of the deepest impressions of my life, which I won't go into, though they're beautiful stories, is seeing Altamira and Lascaux and the whole Dordogne country. There's something very deeply atavistic in me. Stonehenge hits me the same way. And after all, I'm half Scottish and half Irish, which is, say, Celtic. And I think in Celts there is something that remains. But who knows?
You think of yourself as the Celt?
Yeah, definitely. You know, after all, I'm full of blarney. But anyway, from time to time, I work with these primordial images, and I had just finished largely black, but very definitely cave-like with ochres, and in many ways a passionate picture, if I could be so arrogant as to say so. I think a kind of picture that would look beautiful in the Prado. It has a funny mixture of somberness and passion in it, and I called it Les Caves. Now, cave in French means both cave in the English sense, and also means a cellar, and also means a wine cellar. And I had just finished this, and it was a large painting, and also made very many small paintings going around this kind of thing, when Rothschild got in touch with me, and at that time, I think also I was increasingly annoyed at how art is becoming more and more like couturier business. I mean, instant fashion, instant exploitation, instant everything, and in the midst of this swirling, one searches for rock things, and I like things that in a sense transcend history. One of my favorite books is a 2-volume work by a great French historian called The Mediterranean, which is about the substratum of society, like Sicilians, French peasants, etc., who even now, in 1977, do many things that they were doing in 1977 BC. And cheese, wine, dwellings, fire, forests, the ocean, women, things like that that are substantially there without all this neon punk or funk chic mean more and more to me. And they're more and more precious to me because I think they're also really eroding. And so, given all of this and many other things, when he proposed it, I had, so to speak, an image called Les Caves. And I had a small version, not of the big picture, but would also happen to be called Les Caves. And I said, if you want to reproduce this small painting on the label, is fine with me, and I'd be greatly honored. And he said, you understand that part of the agreement is that you will get a certain number of cases of wine, and I'll get the painting. And I said, fine, why not? And
it is a French tradition, however. He has a museum of those paintings now.
Yeah, and so it actually says on the underneath the label, unpublished painting, Les Caves, with my name on it. And the image, it's on an ochre ground, and the image is a kind of abstracted, but I think very alive in the sense that sometimes I have the sensation that it could actually move, a kind of black figure, animal type that is not so different in feeling for me from the animals at Lascaux and Aldemira. You see, at Aldemira, I was a persona non grata in Spain and was determined to see Aldemira, which is way in the northwest corner, and was in France and had a sports car and figured out how I could drive all the way across Spain, get there, get to Aldemira at lunchtime, just before lunch, see the thing, and get back across the border before all the papers would get through. And unfortunately, got a flat tire and lost an hour. So I arrived at Aldemira just as they were closing the gate, the doorway. And so I reached in my pocket and pulled out thousands of pesetos, which must have amounted to $20, and showed it to the guy, and he took one look and went like that and opened the door. And Helen and I went in and walked around, and you don't realize that the cave itself originally was maybe 4 feet high. And what they've done is leave the ground, but then dug down, so you walk around the bottom of the cave at full height, looking up at the ceiling. And there was a single electric light bulb, and I looked at it, and after Lascaux, color and so on, I saw Lascaux before it was damaged. It seemed in many ways, though beautiful, disappointing, like a line drawing. And the guy said in Spanish, "Are you enjoying it?" and so on, but I shrugged a little bit. And I think he saw a slight disappointment in my face. And then he took me by the arm and went to the corner and got a candle and lit it and gave me the lit candle and then pushed me, and I realized I was to get up on this plateau, and I did, holding the candle, and then he turned out the electric light bulb, and then I realized that lying on the floor of the cave, one, I could reach the top of the cave, and the guys obviously at night sat like this and drew their graffiti of animals on the ceiling. But two, what had never occurred to me, and where all the books betray you, is that in the flickering candle, and of course they had torches, the animals moved as the candle flickered. And I've never got over that impression. And in some of the primordial pictures that I paint, though they're just as literally still as the original Aldemira things, some of them do have the sense, I don't know, they radiate something, that they could move, some of them in an ominous way.
You regard each single work as an element in a life's work. There are almost 200 in the Open series, more than 140, in spite of the fact you confess to occasionally erring in your numbering in the Elegy series. What happens if there are more in the Cave series? And are there?
Well, I'm sure there will be, but the principal dilemma of somebody who's not interested only in one image is what Kierkegaard calls the despair of the aesthetic. If there are 1,000 beautiful ideas, how do you choose one instead of another? And all I hope, if I ever give up smoking, is to live long enough to develop some of these things much further. And I should also say that the reason I've made so many of whatever I've made that could be called a series, because I detest serial painting, is simply because I feel that I've never really solved any of them. And so they remain a challenge. The day I can make an elegy that really satisfies me, then I'll stop. But it's, if I may cite a mighty name, Cézanne wasn't interested in a mountain. It was that to get Mont Saint-Victoire exactly as he meant it, he attacked again and again and again till his heart gave out. And it's in that sense that I've attacked an image again and again and again, and not to turn out yard goods, as many of painters do.
One last question, and that is, how did you manage to select one image for the monumental mural that you have been commissioned to do for the new wing, the I.M. Pei designed wing of the National Gallery that will open in, I guess, June of 1978? How did you select an image for that?
Well, actually, I made many sketches of many kinds of things, and finally settled on an elegy, but an elegy that is different from any of the others in being, the painting is going to be 31 feet wide, so that it's really quite an enormous painting. And what I'm trying to do is what I think abstract expressionism in part was always trying to do, which is in a way like Zen painting, to make it, huge as it is, make it look as though it were done like that one had a moment of passion and did it. And the technical and energy, etc., problems involved in it are unbelievable. But if I succeed, or to put it the other way around, what else should I do but try to, given such a location and such a scale, try as best I can and maybe fall flat on my face to make the ultimate statement of what my generation, in my version of my ultimate statement of what my generation